I'll spite.
So picture this. You're sitting in a really high stakes meeting.
Oh, we've all been there.
Right. Maybe it's with senior management or a critical client, or, you're presenting a project to your wider team. You've prepared your slides, you know your material inside and out, and you're feeling genuinely confident.
But then something unexpected happens.
Exactly. Completely out of nowhere, someone asks you a highly complex, incredibly difficult, or maybe even slightly hostile question. It's a question you absolutely didn't prepare for.
And to make it even more stressful, it's happening in English, which might be your second or third language.
Yes, exactly. It's just a universally visceral experience. Your heart rate instantly spikes.
You feel that sudden surge of adrenaline flooding your system. Your palms might start to sweat.
And worst of all, your mind goes completely, terrifyingly blank. You experience that classic deer in the headlights paralysis.
You're frozen. You're just staring back at them, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on you in that room.
I have been there so many times. You feel that cocktail of panic and embarrassment just climbing right up your throat.
Because you know everyone is waiting for a brilliant, articulate answer.
Right, but all you have in your head is just pure static, utter silence. It feels like a survival situation.
Which, biologically speaking, is exactly how your brain is treating it. Your body thinks it's in physical danger.
Wow, so true. Well, today, our entire mission is to completely dismantle that reaction. We're going to change how you process that specific type of pressure.
And I want to be clear, we are moving far beyond the standard generic advice of simply, taking a deep breath.
Taking a breath is physiologically helpful, certainly, but it isn't an actual strategy, is it?
No, not at all. We're going to provide you with robust mental blueprints. Think of it as giving you the architectural structure to build a professional, intelligent, and authoritative answer entirely out of thin air.
That sounds amazing. So by the end of our time together, you listening right now are going to have a complete linguistic and psychological toolkit so you never have to feel that helpless, freezing panic again.
A toolkit for the mind, specifically designed for those high-pressure moments.
But before we open that up, let's ground this in reality. I want you, the listener, to take a moment and actively recall a specific time when your mind went blank in a professional setting.
Bring that memory right to the front of your mind. Think about the room. Think about who asked the question.
How did your body feel in that exact second? What was the very first thought that entered your head when you realized you had no idea what to say? I'll give you a few seconds of silence right now to really put yourself back in that moment.
Just take 3 seconds to think about it.
Okay, hopefully you have that memory clear.
I want to reassure you right now that experiencing that sudden mental freeze is a perfectly normal biological response to stress.
It's not a flaw in your English, right?
Exactly. Your amygdala, which is the part of your brain responsible for processing threats, essentially hijacks your prefrontal cortex.
And the prefrontal cortex is where your logical thinking and language processing happen, correct?
Right. So it's not a failure of your language skills, it's just a temporary biological override. But with the frameworks and strategies we're exploring today, you can actually learn to override that biological response.
So we need to deal with that initial shock first. Before we can even think about delivering a brilliant, perfectly structured answer, we have to survive those first few seconds after the question is asked.
We have to figure out how to gracefully buy time. That initial buffer is crucial.
Because the biggest mistake you can make is trying to answer instantly, right?
Oh, absolutely. Let's explore a concept we'll call the pensive pause. There's this pervasive myth in professional communication, and it's especially prominent among language learners, that speed is the ultimate indicator of fluency.
I used to believe that. People mistakenly believe that if they don't start speaking the very millisecond a question ends, the room will judge them as incompetent.
Or slow, or lacking in confidence.
I fell into that trap constantly early in my career. I was so terrified that if I paused, my colleagues would think, well, they'd think I'm translating in my head or she's struggling with her English.
So what did you do?
My defense mechanism was to just start talking immediately without any coherent plan. And, well, rushing always leads to rambling.
You just end up stringing words together.
Exactly. Hoping that a good point will miraculously materialize if you just keep making noise. It's like trying to sprint on a sheet of solid ice.
That is a great analogy.
You might be moving your legs incredibly fast, which feels like you're doing something, but you have zero traction, no control, and inevitably you're going to fall flat on your face.
Taking a deliberate pause is like stopping to strap on your winter boots before you take a step.
The sprinting on ice analogy captures the futility of it perfectly. It's movement without direction.
If we observe how genuinely high-status individuals communicate, think of veteran CEOs, seasoned diplomats, or, expert negotiators. They do the exact opposite.
But they don't rush.
Not at all. They actively embrace silence. When they are hit with a tough, unexpected question, they don't snap back a response instantly.
What do they do instead?
They might take a slow, deliberate sip of water. They might nod thoughtfully, looking down for a second before making eye contact again. They utilize that pensive pause.
But doesn't that silence risk making them look like they're stumped? If I just sit there nodding for 3 seconds, I'd worry the room thinks I'm completely lost.
It actually achieves the exact opposite effect, provided your body language is calm. A deliberate pause signals immense confidence.
Really? It doesn't look like panic.
Not if it's intentional. It communicates to the room and to the person who asked that you recognize the gravity and complexity of their question, and you're affording it the careful analytical consideration it deserves.
Uncomfortable, nervous silence looks like panic. Calm, intentional silence looks like authority.
Precisely. It proves you aren't intimidated by the pressure to perform like a trained SEAL.
That reframing is really powerful for me and hopefully for you listening too. Silence is a sign of thoughtfulness, not a lack of knowledge.
But let's look at the tactical side of this.
Right, because sometimes, especially early in your career or in a highly aggressive meeting culture, pure silence feels a bit too heavy to pull off naturally.
Exactly. So what can we actually say to buy ourselves those 4 or 5 crucial seconds to gather our thoughts?
This is where we deploy what we call bridge phrases.
Yes. These are simple, highly rehearsed, pre-memorized sentences that you use to bridge the agonizing gap between the end of the question and the beginning of your actual answer.
A classic example would be simply stating, "That is an excellent question."
Or perhaps something slightly more substantial like, "That is a complex issue. Let me think about the best way to explain this."
That is a complex issue. Let me think about the best way to explain this. It sounds incredibly professional. But from a linguistic perspective, why do these specific phrases work so well for someone operating in a second language?
It all comes down to managing your cognitive load.
Cognitive load being the amount of mental effort your working memory is using at any given moment.
Right. Grammatically, these bridge phrases are very straightforward. They rely on basic subject-verb-object structures that you learned early on in your English studies.
So because they are structurally simple and you have memorized them to the point of muscle memory, deploying them requires almost zero cognitive bandwidth.
Exactly. Your brain basically goes on autopilot to deliver the phrase out loud.
And while your mouth is on autopilot delivering this smooth, professional-sounding sentence, your brain is secretly working in the background.
Precisely. You are verbally holding the floor, maintaining control of the room's attention, and projecting calm authority, all while using your freed-up cognitive processing power to formulate your actual argument.
It's a dual processing technique. It's essentially a magic trick.
You're giving the illusion of instant responsiveness while secretly buying yourself 5 seconds to think.
Another tactic I've heard of for stalling is the repeat or rephrase technique. This is where you essentially mirror the question back to the questioner.
Yes, mirroring is a fantastic tool.
If a stakeholder asks a long, convoluted question about project risks, you might say, "So, if I'm understanding you correctly, you are asking how we plan to navigate the potential supply chain disagreements regarding this new timeline."
Not only are you buying that precious cognitive time, but you are also actively confirming the premise of the question.
You're ensuring you aren't about to spend 3 minutes answering the wrong thing.
Right, which happens a lot when people panic.
I have to push back on that, though. I've always worried that asking for clarification or repeating the question out loud makes you look like you weren't paying attention.
That's a very common fear.
Or worse, that you just didn't understand the vocabulary they used, which is a major insecurity for non-native speakers.
It's a very prevalent fear, but is largely unfounded. Think about how true experts operate. A skilled professional almost always defines their terms before they commit to an answer.
Taking a moment to clarify doesn't demonstrate a lack of understanding.
No, it demonstrates precision. It shows active listening. It tells the questioner that you care enough about the integrity of your response that you refuse to operate on assumptions.
It elevates your status in the conversation because you are insisting on clarity. That makes a lot of sense.
You're managing the terms of the engagement rather than just reacting blindly.
Now, what about filler words? In that moment of panic, before the brain catches up, people tend to leak a lot of ums, uhs, and likes.
Oh yes, the vocalized pauses.
How do we manage those? Because they happen so naturally.
The goal isn't necessarily to eliminate all sound, which can feel unnatural,
Mhm.
but to replace panicked sounds with deliberate, thoughtful sounds.
What's the difference between a panic sound and a thoughtful sound?
Instead of a rapid, nervous, high-pitched, um, 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 which signals distress, you consciously shift to a slow, drawn-out, lower register.
Or maybe a complete filler phrase like, well, let me see.
Exactly. It's a subtle auditory shift, but it radically alters how you are perceived. You move from sounding panic-stricken to sounding professorial and measured.
I want to make sure this becomes muscle memory for you, the listener. We're going to practice a bridge phrase out loud right now.
Speaking, it physically helps cement it in your brain, so it's there when the adrenaline hits.
I will say the phrase, and I want you to repeat it clearly, calmly, and out loud wherever you are. Ready?
That is a complex issue. Let me think about the best way to explain this.
Go ahead, I'll give you a few seconds. Say it out loud.
Good. If it felt strange, keep practicing it until it feels as natural as telling someone your name.
Now, let's assume you've successfully deployed your pensive pause or your bridge phrase. The adrenaline is dropping. You've bought yourself 5 seconds of time.
But the spotlight is still firmly on you. What actually comes out of your mouth next, so you don't just start rambling?
This is where we need architectural structure. Without a mental blueprint, even if you're calm, you risk what we call circular speaking.
Circular speaking, right? Talking continuously without a clear direction, hoping you eventually stumble upon a good point.
To prevent this, you need a framework you can rely on blindly. The most robust and universally applicable framework for impromptu speaking is the PRP method. That's P-R-E-P.
The PRP method. I know a lot of communication coaches swear by this.
Why is it so effective from a psychological standpoint?
It's highly effective because it leverages two fundamental cognitive biases regarding memory: the primacy effect and the recency effect.
The primacy and recency effects. Can you explain those simply?
Sure, human beings have limited attention spans. Psychologically, we are wired to remember the very first thing we hear in a sequence, that's the primacy effect, and the very last thing we hear, the recency effect.
And the middle portion, the details.
The middle often becomes a blurry wash in the listener's memory. The PRAP method is engineered to ensure you deliver your most crucial information exactly when the brain is most primed to encode it, at the beginning and at the end.
Let's break down the architecture of PRP. The first P stands for point. This is your thesis statement.
It's where you state your clear stance or your main idea immediately.
The biggest mistake people make is hiding their actual answer at the end of a long, winding story, treating it like a surprise reveal in a movie.
You don't want suspense, you want clarity. Start with the headline.
For example, if a senior manager suddenly asks your opinion on remote work policies, your initial P, your point might be something like, I believe maintaining remote work options is absolutely essential for our team's overall productivity.
It's definitive and leaves no room for confusion. Once you've planted that flag, you move immediately to the R, which stands for reason.
This is the logical underlying why that supports your point. It appeals to the analytical side of your listener.
Why do you believe remote work is essential? You would follow up your point by stating, because it allows our engineers to achieve deep, uninterrupted focus on complex coding tasks, free from office distractions.
So you have the what and the why. Next comes the E, which stands for example.
This is the crucial bridge from abstract theory to concrete reality. A reason is just an opinion until you back it up.
Here, you provide a specific data point, a short case study, or a brief narrative. You could say, for instance, during the third quarter of last year, our back-end development team saw a measured 20% increase in code output when they were permitted to work from home 3 days a week.
The example makes the abstract reason undeniable. Data or a localized story makes the argument tangible.
And finally, you close the loop with the second P, which stands for point.
You restate your initial thesis, perhaps slightly rephrased for variety, but carrying the exact same meaning.
It provides a psychological sense of finality and closure. You conclude with, and that measurable increase in output is exactly why I strongly support continuing our remote work policies.
The beauty of this is how it forces discipline. Let's look at the whole package seamlessly.
Okay, let's hear it.
Point. I believe remote work is essential. Reason. Because it allows for deep, uninterrupted focus. Example. Last quarter, our coding team saw a 20% output increase. Point. That is why I fully support remote work.
It's incredibly clean And more importantly, it stops you from talking endlessly.
Yes. Once you hit that final point, your brain knows the blueprint is finished and you simply stop speaking. The self-containment of the PRP method is its greatest asset. It provides a built-in braking system for your mouth.
Now, while PROP is the gold standard for general questions or opinions, there are other situational frameworks that are highly effective, aren't there?
Absolutely. Consider the scenario where a project manager turns to you and asks for a sudden, unprepared update on a crisis.
Oh, that's stressful. What do we use then?
In that specific context, you might deploy the what, so what, now what framework.
What, so what, now what? That sounds very action-oriented. How does that differ from pre-P?
It's designed for rapid situational awareness rather than persuasion. What is the objective reality, the plain facts of the situation without any emotional commentary?
And so what?
So what translates those facts into meaning for the specific audience listening? Why does this issue impact them or the company?
And then now, what outlines the immediate action plan or the next steps required to resolve it?
Exactly. It cuts through panic and delivers pure utility.
Let me try to build an example on the fly. Let's say a critical software shipment is delayed.
Okay, go for it.
What? We are currently experiencing a 2-week delay in the final software build due to an unexpected bug in the payment gateway.
Very factual.
So what? This means our scheduled marketing launch will need to be pushed back, and we risk missing the holiday sales window if we don't adjust our timeline.
Great, you gave it meaning.
Now what?
Right.
I need the marketing team to pause the upcoming ad spend immediately, and I have authorized overtime for the dev team to work through the weekend to patch the bug.
That's a perfect execution. It's ruthlessly efficient. Nobody cares about the long history of the bug. They just want to know the impact and the plan.
It's so structured. Another excellent situational framework is called TOPT, which stands for Topic, Orient, Point, Transition.
This is a lifesaver when you are unexpectedly asked to present data-heavy slides, perhaps someone else's slides.
Presenting someone else's slides is a absolute nightmare scenario. You want to avoid sounding like a monotone robot just reading numbers off a screen. Walk us through TOPT.
Well, topic is simply announcing what the slide is fundamentally about, the title. But orient is where the magic happens.
How so?
Before you dive into the dense data, you orient the audience by providing context, often through a brief, relatable human story or analogy. You guide their eyes and their minds so the data makes sense in the real world.
Then what is point?
Point is the single most important takeaway you want them to remember from that slide. Not reading every number, just the core conclusion.
And transition is the phrase that smoothly connects the slide's conclusion to the next slide's topic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Orienting the audience prevents the data from feeling dry and detached.
These frameworks are incredibly powerful, but knowing them intellectually isn't enough. You have to build the neural pathways.
Right, you have to practice.
I want you, the listener, to practice this right now. We're going back to the PRP method, and I want you to mentally construct an answer.
We'll use a very low-stakes, easy topic so your brain isn't fighting the content, just focusing entirely on the structure.
Your prompt is simple. What is your favorite season of the year? I want you to mentally build a clear point, give a logical reason, provide a specific example from your own life, and then restate your point.
Take 5 seconds of silence to assemble your architecture. Think through your PREP structure right now.
I'll give you a few seconds. Okay, did you manage to hit all 4 steps?
It might have sounded something like this. My favorite season is absolutely autumn. That's your point.
I prefer it because the temperature is perfect for sustained outdoor activities without exhaustion. That's the reason.
For example, just last weekend I was able to hike 10 miles in the hills comfortably, and the changing colors of the leaves were stunning. The example.
That perfect balance of weather is exactly why autumn will always be my favorite season. And you're back to the point.
If you can systematically structure an answer about the weather, you can scale that exact same architecture up to handle complex supply chain questions or budget analyses. It just requires repetition.
But let's introduce a complication. Frameworks like PRP are fantastic when you understand the premise of the question.
But what happens if you simply didn't understand the question that was asked?
Or worse, what if the intense physiological pressure of the moment makes you completely forget a crucial piece of your English vocabulary?
This is a massive source of anxiety. You have your beautiful PRP structure ready to go, you've taken your pensive pause, but your brain is screaming, I have no idea what they just asked me.
Let's tackle ambiguous questions first. In a business context, what exactly constitutes an ambiguous question, and why are they so dangerous?
An ambiguous question is a sentence that can be logically and grammatically interpreted in more than one way, depending on context or phrasing. It lacks precision.
Can you give us an example?
In linguistics, there's a famous example we use to illustrate syntactic ambiguity. Did you see the man with the telescope?
Right, that sentence is a complete trap. Depending on how you parse it, it could mean, did you use a telescope to look at a man in the distance?
Or it could just as easily mean, did you see a man walking down the street who was literally carrying a telescope?
If a client or a manager asks you an ambiguous question in a high-stakes meeting, you absolutely cannot just guess their intended meaning and hope for the best.
If you guess wrong, you might spend 5 minutes delivering a brilliant answer to the entirely wrong question, which makes you look completely disconnected. Guessing is a gamble you don't need to take.
So what are the techniques to clarify ambiguity professionally without looking like you failed to understand?
You have 3 primary techniques. The first technique is to repeat the question back with a slight clarifying modification to verify its meaning.
Using our telescope example, what would that look like?
You could say, are you asking if I saw a man who was holding a telescope? This forces the questioner to either confirm your interpretation or correct it.
It puts the burden of clarity back on them. I like that. What's the second technique?
The second technique is to ask a direct, bounded, clarifying question. You essentially offer them a multiple choice test. Do you mean X or do you mean Y?
For example, if a colleague asks, do you like watching people? Which is incredibly vague, you can bound the ambiguity by asking, do you mean people watching as a relaxing hobby while sitting in a cafe, or do you mean watching people perform specific tasks, like in a software usability test?
That bounds the context perfectly. The third technique is perhaps the most advanced, and it's highly effective when you want to demonstrate deep analytical thinking.
How does the third one work?
It's offering multiple answers based on the possible interpretations. You essentially say, if you mean interpretation A, then my answer is X. However, if you mean interpretation B, then my answer is Y.
You address all possible angles.
Exactly. If you mean people watching as a hobby, then yes, I find it fascinating. But if you mean observing usability tests, I actually find that quite stressful. It covers all your bases and shows that you see the nuance in their poorly phrased question.
Okay, so those techniques solve the problem of not understanding the question. But let's talk about the nightmare scenario for language learners.
The vocabulary blank.
Yes. You understand the question perfectly, your logic is sound, you know exactly what you want to say, but your brain just drops a crucial word. You know you've studied the word, it's on a flashcard somewhere in your house, but under the adrenaline of the moment, it completely vanishes from your memory.
This is an incredibly common phenomenon, and it brings us to a fascinating area of linguistics known as second language acquisition strategies, commonly referred to as SLA strategies.
SLA strategies, what are those?
These are the real-time cognitive techniques that proficient language learners use to overcome spontaneous vocabulary gaps or grammatical roadblocks.
I think an analogy is helpful here. Forgetting a word mid-sentence is like driving down a highway and suddenly encountering a massive concrete roadblock. The word you need is on the other side.
Right, and poor communicators will just stop the car, turn off the engine, stare at the roadblock, and panic. They freeze.
But a skilled communicator knows you don't stop the car. You take a detour. You drive around the roadblock to arrive at the exact same destination. SLA strategies are your linguistic detours.
That's a highly accurate visualization. The most fundamental detour strategy is called circumlocution.
Circumlocution, that's a big word.
It's just the academic term for paraphrasing or simply talking around the specific word you've forgotten by describing its function, appearance, or relationship to other things.
If you were in a meeting and you suddenly forget the English word grandfather, you don't freeze and apologize for your English.
No, you simply utilize circumlocution and say, my father's father. The listener immediately understands the concept, the communication flow remains unbroken, and you haven't lost any authority.
It's so simple, yet we often feel guilty doing it, like we're cheating somehow. I remember being in a presentation and completely forgetting the word warehouse. My mind was totally blank.
So what did you do?
I just gestured slightly and said, the large industrial building where we store our overflow products. Nobody blinked. The meeting moved on. They cared about the inventory issue, not whether I used the exact noun warehouse.
See? That's a perfect detour. Another brilliant strategy is semantic avoidance.
That sounds highly technical. How does it work in practice?
Semantic avoidance is a very clever tactic where you deliberately substitute a complex vocabulary word or a difficult grammatical structure for a simpler one that you are completely 100% confident in using. You avoid the semantic risk.
Can you give an example of that?
Let's say you were speaking rapidly in the past tense, and you need to use the irregular verb make. But under pressure, you experience a moment of doubt. You start panicking, thinking, wait, is the past tense maked, or is it made, or have made?
Oh, I've had that internal panic so many times.
Right. Instead of freezing to analyze your grammar, you instantly avoid the dangerous irregular verb and substitute it with a regular verb that shares a similar semantic meaning in that context, such as ask, where you know with absolute certainty the past tense is just adding an ed, asked.
You just quietly swap out the complicated tool for a simpler tool that still tightens the bolt. The listener has no idea you made a substitution. They just hear a fluent sentence.
Exactly.
Word
I also have a soft spot for word coinage.
coinage.
This is when you essentially invent a logical compound phrase on the spot to replace a forgotten noun. If you forget the phrase art gallery, you might confidently say picture place.
Or if you forget the word thermometer, you might refer to the temperature stick.
Native speakers actually do this quite frequently when they are tired or distracted. While a native speaker might smile internally at temperature stick, they will absolutely understand your meaning without hesitation.
And this brings us to the most vital, liberating lesson of this entire section. Clarity beats perfection every single time.
Clarity beats perfection. I want everyone listening to truly internalize that.
In a business context, your listener is intensely focused on the ideas you're sharing, the solutions you are offering, and the value you are providing. They're not sitting there grading your syntax, parsing your prepositions, or judging your irregular verb conjugations.
We suffer from this paralyzing illusion that native English speakers speak with flawless textbook grammar at all times. It is a complete illusion.
Wait, really? Native speakers mess up too?
All the time. If you actually look at a raw, unedited transcript of two native speakers having a spontaneous conversation, it is incredibly messy. It is full of disfluencies. They start a sentence, stop halfway through, change grammatical direction entirely, forget common words, use the wrong tense, and leave thoughts hanging in the air.
Natural spoken language is inherently imperfect.
Exactly. The ultimate goal of professional communication isn't grammatical purity. It's the successful transmission of a message from your brain to theirs.
If you take a linguistic detour and describe a warehouse as a large storage bundle, the message is transmitted perfectly. The mission is accomplished. You cannot let the impossible pursuit of grammatical perfection paralyze your ability to share your expertise.
Relinquishing that need for perfection is often the biggest breakthrough for a language learner. Once you accept that detours are a natural part of driving, the journey becomes much less stressful.
Now let's transition into phase 4, where we look at the invisible architecture of conversation. Specifically, we're going to dive into Grice's cooperative principle.
This is fascinating stuff. To truly master impromptu speaking, especially when answering difficult questions, we have to look beneath the surface vocabulary and examine the unspoken subconscious social rules that govern human interaction.
Whenever you open your mouth to speak, your listeners have deeply ingrained subconscious expectations about how you are going to communicate.
Right. And when you break these invisible rules, the conversation instantly feels awkward, frustrating, or suspicious, even if your grammar is perfect.
A highly influential philosopher of language named Paul Grice identified 4 of these fundamental unspoken rules, which he called maxims.
Understanding Grice's maxims is essentially like being handed the cheat codes to human conversation. It explains why some interactions feel smooth and others feel deeply wrong. Let's examine Grice's 4 maxims.
What's the first one?
The first is the maxim of quantity, which is fundamentally about informativity.
Quantity. So how much we are saying, what's the rule here?
The maxim of quantity dictates that your contribution should be as informative as is required for the current purposes of the exchange, but it should not be more informative than is required.
Essentially, give enough detail to answer the question fully, but do not drown the listener in irrelevant, useless details.
Right. And when professionals are put under pressure, they very frequently violate this maxim through nervous over-explaining. They are asked a question that requires a simple yes or no, and perhaps one sentence of context, but panic drives them to deliver a 10-minute historical monologue.
Oh, I see this all the time. A director will ask a project manager, did the client sign the contract extension? The only acceptable answer is, yes, they signed it this morning.
Exactly.
But the nervous manager breaks the maxim of quantity and says, well, I got to the office early and I had some trouble with my email server, but then I called their legal team and their main lawyer was on vacation, so we had to route it through.
And the director's eyes are just glazing over.
Yeah.
They just wanted a yes or no. You've broken the rule of quantity and you look less competent because of it.
Moving on, the second rule is the maxim of quality, which deals with truth.
The maxim of quality is straightforward but critical.
Mm.
Do not say what you believe to be false, and do not say things for which you lack adequate evidence.
In a high-stakes business environment, this translates to a very stark warning. Absolutely never bluff, never fabricate data, never pretend to have read a report you haven't, and never invent an answer simply to avoid looking uninformed in the moment.
Bluffing is the most dangerous game you can play. It might save you in that exact 5-second window, but it is a ticking time bomb for your professional credibility.
Once a team realizes you break the maxim of quality, that you present guesses as facts, they will never fully trust your analysis again.
Exactly. But if you don't know the answer and you can't bluff, what is the strategic move?
You deploy what we call the professional deferral. This is how high-status individuals handle gaps in their immediate knowledge. You look the questioner in the eye, project calm authority, and say something like, that is a critical metric and it deserves a highly precise answer. Rather than guessing, let me pull the exact data from the server and I will email it to you directly after this meeting.
That deserves a highly precise answer. That framing is so elegant. You aren't saying, I don't know, I'm sorry. You're saying, I respect your question too much to give you bad data.
You are strictly adhering to the maxim of quality by refusing to speak without evidence, and ironically, admitting you need to check the data actually increases your perceived integrity.
Okay, the third rule is the maxim of relation, which is about relevance.
This is perhaps the simplest to understand, but easy to violate when flustered. It just means stay on topic. Your contribution must be relevant to the immediate discussion.
If the meeting is focused strictly on the Q3 marketing budget, and you suddenly launch into a passionate tangent about the quality of the cafeteria food or a completely unrelated software issue, you are violating the maxim of relation. You derail the cognitive flow of the group.
And the final rule is the maxim of manner, which focuses on clarity.
Yes, the maxim of manner dictates that you should avoid obscurity of expression, avoid ambiguity, be brief, and most importantly, be orderly in your presentation.
This is the exact theoretical reason why the PRIP method we discussed earlier is so satisfying to listen to. PRIP ensures your thoughts are presented in a highly orderly, logical sequence, perfectly fulfilling the listener's subconscious demand for the maxim of manner.
So we have quantity, quality, relation, and manner.
But let me challenge this model for a moment. If these are the fundamental rules of human conversation, why do people break them constantly? What about sarcasm? Or irony? Or what about when a politician in a debate completely dodges a direct question and talks about their childhood? Are they not breaking the rules?
They absolutely are breaking the rules. But your question highlights a crucial distinction in linguistic pragmatics.
Yeah.
The difference between flouting a maxim and violating a maxim.
Flouting versus violating. What's the difference?
This distinction changes everything. When you flout a maxim, you intentionally and blatantly break the rule in such an obvious way that you expect the listener to notice you're breaking it. You do this to convey an implied hidden meaning, which linguists call a conversational implicature.
That sounds theoretical. Give us a concrete example of flouting.
Sarcasm is the most common example of flouting the maxim of quality, the rule of truth. Imagine you and I are walking to work and it is pouring rain, an absolute torrential downpour. We are getting soaked. I turn to you and say, wow, what a beautiful sunny day.
You are clearly saying something that is objectively false.
But I am not trying to trick you into believing it's sunny. I want you to notice the blatant falsehood so that you understand my implied, unstated meaning. The weather is actually terrible, and I am miserable. By flouting the rule together, we are actually cooperating on a deeper, shared level of understanding.
I see. Flouting is almost like a linguistic wink. It's a shared joke or a mutual understanding. The rule is broken, but the communication is successful. What is violating then?
Violating a maxim is done quietly with the intent to deceive, mislead, or be uncooperative. The listener is not supposed to know the rule is being broken.
So if I tell my boss I finished the Q4 report when I actually haven't even started it.
You are violating the maxim of quality to deceive them. If a politician is asked a hard question about tax policy and they smoothly pivot to a heartwarming story about their grandfather's farm, They are secretly violating the maxim of relation to dodge the issue.
Violating damages trust and degrades communication. Flouting is a sophisticated tool for nuanced, layered meaning. That distinction explains so much about office politics.
Let's do a quick comprehension check for our listener to solidify this.
Good idea. I'm going to describe a very common workplace scenario, and I want you, the listener, to identify which of Grice's 4 maxims is being broken. Here's the scenario. You are in a fast-paced stand-up meeting. Your manager turns to you and asks a very direct, bounded question. Is the software update ready to launch today? Yes or no?
You panic. Instead of answering, you ramble on for 5 uninterrupted minutes of the history of the coding process, a complicated bug your team faced last Tuesday, and your grand vision for the software next year, without ever actually saying the words yes or no.
Which specific maxim are you breaking the most severely here? Think about it. I will give you a few seconds.
Do you have your answer?
If you identified the maxim of quantity, you are absolutely correct. You provided vastly more information than was required for the purpose of the exchange, drowning the listener in irrelevant details.
You could also argue you broke the maxim of manner by failing to be brief and orderly. Excellent job if you caught that. Internalizing these maxims gives you a diagnostic tool.
When a conversation feels frustrating or confusing, you can mentally check. Is someone giving too much detail? Are they going off topic? Are they being obscure? Once you identify the broken maxim, you can steer the conversation back on track.
This brings us to a very critical juncture. We spent a lot of time discussing how to be cooperative, clear, and structured. But we all know the business world isn't always a friendly place.
What happens when the person asking the question is actively not being cooperative? What if you are dealing with a hostile interviewer, an aggressive stakeholder, or a rival colleague who is actively trying to undermine you or overwhelm you?
Dealing with hostility requires a specialized subset of tactical communication skills. It's about maintaining authority while de-escalating tension. Let's begin with a very common, often weaponized aggressive move. The overwhelm tactic.
The overwhelm tactic. I know this one. This is when an interrogator asks you a multi-part, highly complex question, firing 3, 4, or even 5 distinct queries at you in a single, rapid breath.
I have been on the receiving end of that, and it feels awful. They say something like, how will this new software migration affect our Q3 budget? And what is the exam day-by-day timeline for implementation across global offices? And haven't you considered that this will completely destroy the morale of the legacy sales team?
You feel like you've been ambushed. Your instinct is to try and answer everything simultaneously, which just makes you sound frantic. How do you handle that barrage without looking defensive or evasive?
The absolute worst thing you can do is attempt to answer chronologically. Your brain will overload, and you will inevitably miss parts of the question, making you look incompetent. The secret to defeating the overwhelm tactic is to refuse their pacing. You must actively regain control of the conversation structure.
You do this by first acknowledging the complexity of what they threw at you and then immediately throwing the ball back into their court by asking them to prioritize.
What does that sound like practically? How do I throw it back politely?
You maintain intense eye contact, keep your voice remarkably calm and slow, and you say something like, you have just raised several highly critical points regarding the budget implications, the global timeline, and the impact on team morale. That is a lot of important ground to cover. Which of those 3 specific areas would you like me to address first?
Wow. Which of those 3 areas would you like me to address first? That is a phenomenal move. It completely neutralizes their aggressive momentum.
It forces them to stop talking, organize their own messy thoughts, and pick a single lane. It puts you firmly back in the driver's seat. You aren't refusing to answer. You are just demanding an orderly process.
Precisely. It immediately de-escalates the chaotic pressure while simultaneously projecting an image of a highly organized, unflappable professional. Now, once you have forced them to focus on a single topic, you can deploy what media trainers call the 3 master techniques for handling difficult questions.
The bridge, hook, and flag. We talked briefly about bridge phrases earlier as a stalling tactic, but using a bridge as a master technique during a hostile interrogation is structurally different, isn't it?
It is. In this context, a bridge is a verbal pivot. It is a technique designed to smoothly move the conversation away from the hostile, negative, or irrelevant territory the questioner wants to focus on and guide it over to the positive, strong territory that you want to emphasize. You briefly acknowledge their premise, and then you literally build a bridge to your talking points.
Give me an example of a bridging phrase in action.
Let's say a stakeholder aggressively focuses on the high initial cost of a project. You might say, I completely understand your reservations about the upfront capital expenditure. However, when we evaluate the long-term ROI, and then you seamlessly transition into talking about the massive value the project brings over 5 years.
You don't ignore their concern about cost, that would be evasive, but you refuse to stay stuck there. You bridge over to value.
I understand your reservations, however. That is a very sturdy bridge. It validates them before redirecting them. Okay, what about the hook technique? What are we fishing for?
The hook technique is designed to manufacture curiosity. It's a way of psychologically controlling the next question they ask. You intentionally conclude your answer with an intriguing, slightly incomplete statement that makes the listener naturally want to ask for more detail. Specifically, detail about a topic you are incredibly well prepared to discuss.
So if I'm defending a marketing campaign that had mixed results, I might finish my defense by saying, well, the initial click-through rates were average. The sustained increase in organic web traffic over the last month is just one of the highly surprising secondary results we are tracking right now.
Exactly. You've baited the hook perfectly. The natural, almost uncontrollable human response to hearing that is to ask, really, what are the other surprising results? And suddenly, they're asking you a question you desperately want to answer. You have completely reversed the dynamic. You are now leading the interrogation.
It's essentially conversational judo, using their momentum against them. And the last of the 3 master techniques is the flag. I'm visualizing waving a giant red flag on a racetrack to stop everything and get attention.
That's the exact intended imagery. Flagging is a technique used to forcefully emphasize your core message so that it absolutely cannot be ignored or lost in the noise of a heated debate. You use a verbal signal to explicitly tell the listener that the next sentence out of your mouth is the most critical piece of information they will hear.
How do you wave that verbal flag?
You use phrases that command absolute attention. You might say, if you only remember one single metric from our entire discussion today, it should be this. Or, let's put aside the minor details. The absolute heart of the matter is. When you use a strong flag, human psychology dictates that people will instinctively lean in, stop formulating their next argument, and actually listen to your following sentence.
So we have the overwhelm tactic neutralized, and we have the bridge, hook, and flag ready to deploy. But we need to address the emotional layer. What if the hostile question isn't just tricky or complex, but deeply emotionally charged? What if the person asking it is visibly angry, defensive, or feeling threatened by your proposal?
Emotional volatility is the hardest variable to manage. When a question is emotionally charged, the absolute worst strategic mistake you can make is to meet their emotion with equal emotion. If they are angry and you become defensive, or if they raise their voice and you raise yours, the logic of the meeting collapses and it devolves into a primitive status fight.
Your amygdala engages with their amygdala. The tactic here requires immense self-control. You must ruthlessly pivot to objective facts while actively finding a sliver of common ground to disarm their aggression.
How on earth do you find common ground with someone who is actively attacking your project in front of your boss?
You have to listen past the anger to find the underlying, often legitimate business concern. You validate that underlying concern without agreeing with their hostile attack. For example, you might lower your voice, project extreme calm, and say, I can hear how frustrated you are, and I completely understand your underlying concern about keeping this department profitable. After all, we both share the exact same goal of ensuring this company succeeds long-term. With that shared goal in mind, let me walk you through the factual, objective data of this specific investment.
That is masterful de-escalation. You align yourself with their ultimate unarguable goal, the company's success, which makes you an ally, not an enemy, and then you immediately pivot away from feelings and onto spreadsheets and data. It is psychologically very difficult for someone to continue yelling at you when you are calmly agreeing on a shared goal and pointing to empirical evidence.
Precisely. You essentially remove the emotional oxygen from the fire. By validating their core intent, even if their delivery was hostile, you lower their defenses enough for logic to re-enter the room.
This transition into de-escalation leads us perfectly into our next major topic: professional presence and politeness strategies. Managing pushback effectively doesn't just rely on what facts you present, it relies heavily on how you phrase those facts. You can have the most brilliant, undeniable data in the world, but if your delivery sounds arrogant, aggressive, or dismissive, human nature dictates that people will reject your ideas simply because they reject you. Let's delve into the fascinating world of business English politeness strategies.
These are the linguistic tools that allow you to disagree forcefully without destroying your workplace relationships. Linguists, particularly researchers like Brown and Levinson who developed politeness theory, divide politeness into distinct categories. We're going to focus on three: positive politeness, negative politeness, and off-record politeness.
And it's crucial to understand that in linguistics, the terms positive and negative do not mean good and bad or happy and sad. Let's start with positive politeness. This is a strategy fundamentally focused on protecting and elevating the other person's ego. It's about making the listener feel valued, competent, liked, and validated as a member of the in-group.
Okay, so it's about ego management. But how do we actively protect someone's ego while still managing a tough business situation, like giving an order or offering critique?
One highly effective positive politeness strategy is what linguists call pseudo-agreement. This is when you use specific conclusory markers in your speech, like the word then, to soften a direct demand and create the illusion of consensus, avoiding blunt, face-threatening disagreement. Imagine a manager wants to report quickly. An aggressive, direct order would be, give me 75 units by Friday. That threatens the employee's autonomy and ego.
But using pseudo-agreement, the manager might discuss the schedule briefly and then say, well then, I'd like to see 75 units completed by the end of the month. The insertion of the word then implies that this demand isn't an arbitrary order, but rather a logical shared conclusion that both parties just arrived at together through discussion, even if it's exactly what the manager wanted from the start.
It's subtle, but it makes the demand feel like a collaboration rather than a dictatorship. It saves face. Another very common positive politeness strategy I see is exaggerated approval.
Yes, this is the classic compliment sandwich. Before you deliver harsh constructive criticism, you intentionally build up the person's ego to cushion the blow. You might say, you have the potential to make an absolutely phenomenal team leader, your vision is great, but we really need to look at this one specific issue with your delegation skills. You secure their ego first so they don't immediately become defensive when the critique arrives.
And using inclusive language is another huge part of positive politeness. This means consciously substituting we and us for you and I. Instead of pointing a finger and saying, you need to fix this massive error in the code, which isolates them and attacks their competence, you say, let's take a look at how we can resolve this coding issue together. It verbally shares the responsibility and makes them feel supported by the group, even if they are the one who actually has to do the fixing.
That's a perfect example of maintaining in-group solidarity. Now let's contrast that with negative politeness. Again, negative does not mean being rude or pessimistic. In pragmatic linguistics, negative politeness is entirely about respecting the other person's freedom of action, their autonomy, and their personal boundaries. It's the linguistic effort you make to show that you are trying not to impose on them or demand their time unnecessarily.
I find an analogy really helps clarify the difference here. Negative politeness is like respectfully knocking on a closed office door and waiting for explicit permission before entering the room. Positive politeness, on the other hand, is walking right through the door with a big smile, a cup of coffee for them, and giving them a high five. In intimate friendships, positive politeness is great. But in a professional business context, especially across hierarchies or cultures, you usually want to knock on the door first. You want to give them their space.
That is a remarkably clear way to visualize the distinction. Respecting boundaries is key in business. One of the primary linguistic tools for negative politeness is called hedging. This involves using specific softening words or phrases, like I think, I guess, perhaps, maybe, or in my opinion, to make a statement less absolute and dogmatic. Instead of stating a harsh, unyielding fact like, this new marketing design is terrible and will fail, which leaves no room for debate and attacks the designer, you hedge it. I think this design might need a little more refinement before launch. It expresses the same concern, but it leaves intellectual room for discussion and allows the designer to save face.
Another powerful tool for negative politeness in English is indirectness and tense shifting. This is a very specific, somewhat strange quirk of the English language. Changing present or future tense auxiliary verbs like can or will into their past tense forms like could or would instantly makes your request sound significantly more deferential, polite, and less demanding.
Exactly. Grammatically, shifting to the past tense creates a sense of psychological distance and hypotheticality. Asking a colleague, can you send me the Q3 report? Is perfectly acceptable, but it is direct. Asking, could you send me the Q3 report? Sounds much softer and more polite because the could implies that their ability to do so is conditional on their availability. It respects their freedom to say no, even if in reality they have to do it.
And the final negative politeness strategy I want to highlight is impersonalizing. This is the tactical avoidance of the pronouns you or I when discussing a sensitive problem or a failure, specifically to avoid pointing fingers and assigning direct blame. Instead of confronting a colleague and saying, you made a huge mistake in this budget calculation, which will trigger instant defensiveness, you utilize the passive voice and impersonalize the sentence. It appears that a mistake was made in the budget calculation.
Impersonalizing separates the individual's identity from the problem. It allows both of you to look objectively at the mistake as a separate entity on the table, rather than attacking the person. It is an absolutely crucial skill for maintaining professional harmony during stressful projects. Now, the third category identified by linguists is off-record politeness. This involves being intentionally vague. It uses hints, heavy irony, or subtle metaphors to make a request without actually stating the request out loud.
Can you give an example?
For example, if you were in a meeting room and it is freezing cold, instead of asking someone directly to close the window, you might rub your arms, shiver noticeably, and say to the room generally, "It's remarkably chilly in here today, isn't it?" You are going off record and hoping someone else takes the hint and closes the window for you, sparing you from having to make a direct imposition.
But in a fast-paced business context, relying on off-record politeness seems incredibly dangerous, right?
It is highly discouraged in professional environments. Business communication demands clarity, efficiency, and accountability. Dropping vague hints or using heavy irony can lead to massive misunderstandings, missed deadlines, and costly errors across teams. If you need the window closed, or more importantly, if you need a critical report followed by 5 p.m., you do not drop a hint. You use clear, direct, negative politeness. You say, "Could you please ensure the report is filed by 5 p.m.? Relying on someone to catch your hint is a failure of leadership communication.
Clarity really is paramount. Let's put these theories into practice with a teaching prompt for you, the listener. We are going to practice actively using negative politeness to soften a harsh statement. I'm going to give you a very blunt, direct, almost aggressive sentence. I want you to mentally rewrite it to be polite and professional by using two specific techniques we just discussed. First, add a hedge, like the word perhaps or the phrase I think, and second, use a tense shift, changing a direct verb like tell or can to a softer, more distant form. Here is the harsh, aggressive sentence. Tell me the budget.
Imagine saying that to a senior stakeholder. It'd be a disaster. How would you soften that sentence using a hedge and a tense shift? Take a few seconds to formulate a polite, professional alternative in your head. Let's pause for a moment.
There are several ways you could have elegantly softened that. You might have come up with something like, could you perhaps give me an idea of the budget, I think? Or simply, would you mind sharing the current budget estimates with us? By consciously shifting the tense to could or would and adding a softening hedge, you respected their professional space, lowered their defenses, and maintained your own polished professional presence.
That is excellent mental practice. Consciously applying these politeness strategies is what separates an abrasive manager from a respected leader. Now let's move into our final area of focus, Phase 7, essential idioms for doubt and uncertainty.
This is a remarkably important, often overlooked area of language. Sometimes, despite utilizing all the structural frameworks like PRP, deploying all your stalling tactics, and maintaining perfect politeness, the undeniable, honest truth of the situation is that you or your executive team simply have not made a decision yet. The answer doesn't exist. And you need advanced, nuanced vocabulary to express that state of uncertainty professionally, without resorting to just shrugging and saying, I don't know, which sounds incredibly weak and uninformed.
English, particularly business English, is incredibly rich in idiomatic expressions designed to describe very specific flavors and degrees of uncertainty. Choosing the right idiom signals that you understand the nuance of the delay. Let's categorize these idioms by their underlying context to make them easier to remember. First, let's explore idioms to use when you are still actively deciding, when the situation is still firmly within your control, but the intellectual debate is ongoing.
The first one that comes to mind is toing and froing. As in, the executive committee has been toing and froing on this merger decision all week.
That's a highly evocative idiom. It creates a physical, visual image of moving back and forth, much like a pendulum or a tennis match. When you say you are toing and froing, it means you are actively, vigorously debating between two viable options, constantly switching sides as new data emerges. It's a great phrase because it shows you are deeply engaged in the analytical process, not just ignoring the decision.
Another incredibly useful one for maintaining authority while being undecided is saying you are in two minds. For example, a hiring manager might say, I am in two minds about offering the position to this candidate.
Being in two minds is a superbly professional alternative to the blunt, I don't know.
Yeah.
When you tell your colleagues you are in two minds, you are signaling that you recognize the complex validity in both sides of the argument. You see the pros and you see the cons, and your two minds are actively weighing them against each other. It projects thoughtfulness rather than ignorance.
What if you are undecided because you simply need more external information or feedback before committing to a path? You can tell your team you want to put feelers out. Before we definitively pick a city for the annual conference, let's put some feelers out to the sales team to see what they prefer.
The imagery here comes from nature like an insect, using its antenna to test its environment. To put feelers out means you are going to discreetly, informally ask for opinions, gather informal data, or test the political waters before making a hard, public commitment. It's a very strategic delay. And if you find yourself truly stuck between two equally difficult, perhaps unpleasant choices, you could declare that you are in a quandary. I am in a real quandary over which software vendor to terminate. A quandary is a formal state of perplexity, a difficult dilemma where there is no easy answer.
And then there is the absolute classic, the most universally understood delay tactic. Sleep on it. That is a massive budget proposal you've just presented. Let me sleep on it, and I will give you my final answer tomorrow morning. It's a universally accepted, polite way to demand a 24-hour buffer for subconscious processing before finalizing a major decision.
Those idioms perfectly cover situations where the agency and the decision remain in your hands. But we need a different set of vocabulary for when the outcome is unknown and completely out of your direct control.
Right. If you are a spectator to a decision, unable to choose a side or waiting for others, you might describe yourself as being on the fence. I am completely on the fence about the proposed changes to the remote work policy. I'll wait to see how the pilot program goes. The imagery is clear. You are sitting right on the dividing line between two properties, refusing to jump down into one yard or the other.
If a negotiation or a project could realistically end in two completely different contradictory results, you say the situation could go either way. The union negotiations are incredibly tense right now. The final contract agreement could truly go either way. It acknowledges pure unpredictability.
Or, to express a sense of chaotic uncertainty, you can say things are up in the air. Because of the sudden executive leadership changes, our department's project timeline is totally up in the air.
Note the emotional nuance there. Saying something is up in the air almost always carries a slightly uneasy, frustrating, or negative connotation in business. It implies a total lack of grounding, structure, or stability. It's not a comfortable place for a project to be. Somewhat similar in meaning, but more formal, is saying the jury's still out, or it remains to be seen. Will this expensive new marketing campaign actually increase our Q4 sales? Well, the jury's still out on that.
The jury's still out. That implies that the trial is ongoing, the evidence is still being actively considered by the decision makers, but no final official verdict has been reached yet. You just have to wait. Finally, let's examine idioms used when a decision is actively being changed or reversed, which almost always creates a negative, highly frustrating context in the business world. If someone in leadership is constantly erratically changing their plans without logic, we say they chop and change. Our new director keeps chopping and changing the software requirements every single week, and it is exhausting the development team.
Chop and change implies a chaotic lack of overarching strategy. It creates confusion and destroys team momentum. Now, if you make a massive, life-altering decision, like accepting a counteroffer or signing a mortgage, but at the last second you experience overwhelming panic and want to cancel the deal, we say you get cold feet. Imagine standing on the edge of a high diving board, looking down, realizing the water looks terrifyingly cold and slowly backing away. That visceral physical reaction is getting cold feet. It's a failure of nerve at the final moment.
A slightly milder, more intellectual version of cold feet is having second thoughts. I initially agreed to lead the restructuring committee, but looking at the workload, I am now having serious second thoughts. You are actively doubting the wisdom of your original opinion or agreement.
Mastering these idioms adds incredible nuance, color, and undeniable professionalism to your spoken English. They allow you to communicate complex states of mind effortlessly. To help lock these into your active vocabulary, let's have you, the listener, practice articulating a few of the most powerful ones out loud right now. This builds the physical muscle memory required for spontaneous speech.
I am going to say 3 of these idioms clearly. I want you to repeat them out loud after me, paying attention to the rhythm and intonation. Ready? I am in 2 minds. I'll give you a second. The jury's still out. Take a second to repeat. I need to sleep on it. Take a second.
Fantastic. Consciously substituting these phrases instead of saying, I don't know, will immediately elevate your perceived authority and professional presence in any meeting.
We have covered an absolutely immense, transformative amount of ground today. We really have constructed a comprehensive, highly tactical mental toolkit for you. Let's synthesize this journey so the structure is clear in your mind.
We began by learning how to biologically survive the initial freezing shock of an unexpected question by embracing the deliberate pensive pause and utilizing low cognitive load bridge phrases. Then we explored how to architect your thoughts instantly using the psychologically sound PRP, method, point, reason, example, point, and situational variations like TOPT.
We tackled the terrifying prospect of navigating ambiguity by using precise techniques to clarify vague questions, and we learned how to overcome sudden vocabulary roadblocks using SLA strategies like circumlocution and semantic avoidance, deeply internalizing the ultimate rule that clarity always beats grammatical perfection.
We then pulled back the curtain on the invisible social rules of conversation through Grice's maxims, learning the critical importance of not over-explaining or bluffing. We armed you with specific tactics for dismantling hostile, multi-part questions, like forcing prioritization and using the bridge, hook, and flag maneuvers. We explored how to navigate conflict while protecting egos using sophisticated positive and negative politeness strategies, like hedging and shifting tenses to create deferential distance.
And finally, we expanded your communicative range with advanced idiomatic expressions to articulate doubt, ongoing deliberation, and uncertainty with absolute professionalism, ensuring you never sound helpless or uninformed again. It is a dense, comprehensive blueprint for mastering impromptu speaking.
It truly is. If you actively apply these frameworks and understand the psychology behind them, the next time a brutally difficult question comes your way, your amygdala won't hijack your brain. You won't freeze. Your mind will recognize the structural requirements of the situation and automatically reach for the precise linguistic tool you need.
As we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final, slightly provocative thought to reflect on. When you are asked a fiercely difficult, unexpected, or even hostile question in a high-stakes professional setting, how you handle that specific micro moment, your physical composure, your intellectual honesty, the grace of your silence, and the logical architecture of your response often leaves a much more profound and lasting impression on your colleagues than the actual factual data you deliver.
That is perhaps the most profound takeaway of all. A difficult, unexpected question is never just a test of your memorized knowledge. It's a fundamental test of your professional character. It reveals to the room exactly how you operate under stress. Can you maintain calm authority? Do you possess the intellectual integrity to admit when you need more data? Can you disagree with a hostile colleague respectfully without losing your poise? Those underlying behavioral qualities define true leadership far more than your ability to instantly recite spreadsheet data points.
Exactly. It's a test of character, and character is built through deliberate practice. So to build that communicative character and strengthen those neural pathways, here is your actionable call to action for this week. We highly encourage you to practice the PREP method out loud for just 10 minutes every single day. You do not need an audience or a high-stakes meeting. While you are driving to work, while you are cooking dinner, or while you are taking a walk, pick a completely random object or a mundane topic like the weather, your favorite coffee, or a minor news story, and force yourself to physically speak a complete point, reason, example, point structure out loud.
The more you drill that architectural structure in low-stress, everyday environments, the more deeply automatic and effortless it will become when the adrenaline hits in a boardroom. Keep practicing your English fearlessly, keep challenging your own assumptions, and always remember that every linguistic stumble or forgotten word is merely a minor detour on the long, rewarding road to true fluency.
You have absolutely got this. Thank you so much for investing your time and focus with us on this intensive journey today. Keep practicing, stay deeply curious, and we will talk to you next time.